So many people, especially women, are told by their doctor that their cholesterol levels are fine, yet nearly half of all heart attacks happen in people with so-called normal cholesterol. How is this possible? Why are doctors still reassuring patients based on basic cholesterol tests when these standard panels clearly miss critical markers of hidden heart disease risk? At what point should women in particular start looking at deeper tests in their cholesterol panel?
I think this has definitely been an evolution for me, because I used to be of the opinion that normal is fine, and now I'm of the opinion that lower is better. And we have a lot of evidence around trying to get our cholesterol levels as low as possible, being protective for things like cardiovascular disease, dementia, and many other conditions as well. So the reason why I think people are late to come to this, and when I say people, I mean I'm specifically talking about primary care physicians, is because our understanding of lipid biology is pretty basic at best, and this is actually quite a fast-moving field of cardiology. The other thing that muddies the water a bit more is a lot of people, particularly in the NHS and in Australia as well, haven't come across some of these more novel methods of testing lipoproteins, or specifically the markers of cardiovascular risk that are better in many ways than just a simple LDL-C. So we can talk about some of these markers, but apolipoprotein B is a relatively new marker that we know is more predictive of cardiovascular risk over a 10-year plus period. And there are other markers as well that you just need to do once, something called Lp(a), which is a particularly atherogenic part of a particle. And you just need to do that test once to determine whether you are at higher risk. Unfortunately, with that result, there's not much you can do about it because it's genetically predispositioned. So despite pharmacotherapy and all the rest of it, it doesn't affect your Lp(a) number. But there is ongoing research within the pharmaceutical world as to whether we can do something about that as well. So I think this whole area around cholesterol metabolism, the markers, primary care physicians not understanding so much about that, is why people with normal results are sort of passed off as you don't need to worry about it, or in actual fact the evidence states that we should be a lot more aggressive with these numbers.
I mean, it's driving me insane. Okay, so you and I are both from national healthcare systems, the UK and Australia, and I bring this up because my 70-year-old mother goes to her primary care physician, and her primary care and I often argue. And she ran a lipid panel for my mum and didn't include ApoB or Lp(a). So then I went and ran it myself. My mother has an Lp(a) of 144 nanomoles, where the standard cutoff should be below 75. Now, why she's not being told that is very upsetting to me. And I think to myself, well, how many women are out there, and men, who are going to their primary care, and their primary care is saying your cholesterol's fine. And not many people really understand what that means. I get a text message almost every day from a friend. Hey, my doctor said my cholesterol's high. I'm like, well, what part? She's like, I don't know. So let's break it down into simple terms. What are the main numbers in our lipid panel? Like, let's talk about LDL, HDL, triglycerides. That's what everyone's pretty much going to see. But then let's look at ApoB and Lp(a) just a bit more in detail.
Yeah, let's start with Lp(a) because my reading of the latest prevalence of this is that it's around 10% of the population. So this isn't uncommon. And when you have a raised Lp(a), which I would regard anything above 75, some people say even above 50 is going to give you that risk. So this is something that I'd be concerned about for sure. The issue is, and I see why National Health Services haven't put this into their blood panel as of yet. The issue is we don't really know what to do with it apart from trying to optimize every other cardiovascular risk factor. So optimizing blood pressure, optimizing LDL-C that we'll talk about in a second, making sure that you're exercising, making sure that you're not smoking. Other than that, there isn't really a strategy to deal with a raised Lp(a), but it does make you more cautious. So I would want to know my number, and I do, and I'd want to know the number for my patients as well. Apolipoprotein B is a tag that is found on all the atherogenic particles. So your IDLs, your VLDLs, so your very low density lipoproteins, your LDL. So what it does is it gives you a much more holistic picture of the different atherogenic particles in your blood draw.
By atherogenic, the one that is mainly to cause plaque buildup in the arteries,
so
and cause atherosclerosis.
Exactly, yeah. And actually, let's just rewind and talk about atherosclerosis. So what is atherosclerosis? Well, it's a inflammatory process that leads to narrowing of the arteries. And your arteries are found in lots of different parts of your body, obviously, but the main ones that we are careful of are the ones in our heart, the ones in our brain, the ones in our aorta, so the large aorta, which can get furred, and that can lead to ischemic events. You can also get peripheral issues as well, so the limbs. And this whole process has sort of 3 core parts, although there are many different steps in the progression of atherosclerosis. First, there is a mechanical shearing damage, so that can be from high blood pressure, it can be from particles, like if you're a smoker, for example, that can damage the inner lining of your arteries, called the endothelial. Then you've got the cholesterol molecule itself that can find itself lodged into that broken part of the interior of the artery. And then you've got the immune component or the inflammation component. So when you do get a cholesterol molecule in the inner wall, that can become oxidized. Your immune cells recognize this as foreign, and then it starts the inflammation cascade, which leads to the formation of a plaque. There are many different steps into that, but essentially what it does is it narrows the lining of your artery, which means that the oxygenated blood can't get through as efficiently, and that's where you get lack of oxygen and nutrients downstream to where those blockages are. So that's the general process of atherosclerosis, and the reason why we worry about high levels of LDL-C and other atherogenic particles is because it basically raises the probability that a cholesterol molecule is going to find itself in the wall, where it can become oxidized, and then inflammation can ensue and it causes the narrowing. So essentially it's just a probability game, which is why we want to make sure that we're keeping our numbers as low as possible. You mentioned HDL, so this, one of my bugbears, is where we call LDL bad cholesterol and HDL good cholesterol. There is no different type of cholesterol. Cholesterol is cholesterol. There are no multiple different types of cholesterol. There are different carriers of cholesterol-containing components. And actually, my thinking about this has changed even more so. I used to think that these molecules were actually transporting cholesterol for energy and for the cell membranes. Actually, cholesterol is largely a structural component of these taxis. What we are ferrying around are things like triglycerides, and triglycerides are utilized by the cell for energy as well.
Back to this whole physicians calling cholesterol panels normal. I also think that a lot of doctors are not really understanding about ratios and trends, right? So let's just say you're trending upwards depending on your age, and you get an LDL of 120, and it seems like in your HSCRP is also elevated. It could mean that maybe you're trending upwards. That is worth a conversation.
Yeah.
But people aren't getting that conversation for many reasons. Do you look at the triglycerides to HDL ratio as well? And do you look at ratios between these two?
In some cases, yeah. I think like the absolute numbers give me more of a picture, but the things that I make a beeline in whenever I'm looking at a panel is apolipoprotein B. I'll look at triglycerides. I think that's more of a marker of insulin resistance, which gives us a lot of information as well. And let's say you don't have an ApoB. Another good marker of this is non-HDL-C. So this gives you basically a panel where anything that isn't HDL-C is included. And so that's going to likely include things like your VLDLs, your IDLs, and all the other atherogenic particles. But if possible, if you can get an ApoB, I think that's a lot more informative of someone's cardiovascular risk profile. And obviously, it's not just the numbers, it's also everything else around it, like blood pressure, pressure, for example, resting heart rate, the amount of exercise they do, family history, and Lp(a) as well. And just to sort of clarify, I've just got my cheat sheet of cholesterol marker reference ranges here, because we kind of fleet in between milligrams per deciliter and millimoles per liter. In the UK, we tend to use millimoles per liter, which is, an LDL-C of less than 2.6 is what I'd want as a bare minimum. But for the conversion to milligrams per deciliter, we're looking at less than 100. There is an argument that people should be aiming for even less, particularly if they've already had either a strong risk factor in their family history or a previous event. We want to be looking at an even more aggressive number of less than 80 or less than 70. That's milligrams per deciliter. And ApoB, if we're specifically looking at ApoB, that needs to be under 90 as a minimum, and under 0.9 if we're looking at millimoles per liter as well.
We'll get into the best ways to lower this, because I think that there's a lot of misunderstandings around that, whether it's pharmacological or whether it's dietary. But my main concern is, why is it still the number one cause of death globally, cardiovascular disease, when we have all of this information? And it brings me back to my understanding as well of Alzheimer's disease, which is once you get the disease, there is no reversing it.
Yeah.
And it seems to be the case with cardiovascular disease as well, because you can't really eliminate the plaque.
Aside from some studies that have looked at very aggressive pharmaceutical management and lifestyle management, showing some regression of plaque, I think that's sort of out of the ordinary. I think I agree with your statement that once you do have established cardiovascular disease, it's the forward motion is always going to be getting worse. But what we can do is sort of change the trajectory and the speed at which you get cardiovascular disease such that you die with it, not from it. And that's the sort of aim of everything within preventative cardiology and lifestyle medicine these days, is to try and get to that picture. The issue is, we all have cardiovascular disease to some extent. We can have it as early as our teens and our 20s. And so when people ask me about how and when they should start thinking about heart disease prevention, it's now. It's always now. It's as soon as you can. Get regular numbers, make sure you're doing all the basics of ensuring you're exercising as much as you can, doing a good mix of resistance and aerobic training, making sure that your blood pressure is well maintained and you actually know what your number is, and also making sure that you're doing all the added things as well, clean air, ensuring that you're not exposing yourself to environmental pollutants. These are all things that can mitigate your risk of cardiovascular disease, alongside all the nutritional stuff that we're going to go into as well. So
closing the loop on that, true or false, having a normal LDL cholesterol reading means you have no heart attack risk?
Oh, no, that's false.
False. Great. I get a lot of pushback on social media regarding this whole cholesterol. And for the love of God, I need people to understand that a cholesterol molecule is too big to pass the blood-brain barrier.
Yeah.
But just given the amount of randomized control trials that we have in this area for Alzheimer's disease, it does suggest, especially more for the ApoE4 carriers, that an LDL less than 70 is ideal for brain health outcomes.
Yeah.
But then we've got people like Paul Saladino, who is arguing that even an LDL of over 300 is not a cause for concern. So I can understand why there's so much confusion in this area.
I kind of get the sort of keto camp arguments of like, no matter how high it is, don't worry about it, because you're lean, you're healthy, your triglycerides are low, you don't need to worry about any of this stuff. That is, I think, a very naive opinion that isn't reflective of the science that we have today. Even if your insulin resistance is great, all the other markers of your health are great, but you've got a high lipoprotein, apolipoprotein B or LDL-C, you are on the trajectory towards cardiovascular disease regardless. And I don't care how clean your diet is, it's very hard to control for the other risk factors for cardiovascular disease, like stress, like environmental pollutants. You can live in the cleanest environment possible, but you're always going to be having some impact on your body. Poor sleep, for example. There's lots of things that you can't counter. And so you got to control the controllables. And one of the big things that you can control is your cholesterol numbers. I think the other thing that gets sort of perpetuated out there is how important cholesterol is as a molecule to your body, and why would you ever take anything to reduce it or do anything to reduce it. And you can sort of understand the rationale behind that, right? Cholesterol is a phenomenally important molecule. It's got a structural role for your cells.
Helps with the synthesis of vitamin D.
Absolutely. You've got, 20%, I believe, of your brain is made out of cholesterol. You've got
estrogen carrier.
Yeah, cholesterol is the precursor molecule for all of your steroid hormones. You have there's a transport function as well. But this is why nature made it so that every single cell that requires cholesterol has the means to generate cholesterol itself. We don't actually require cholesterol in our diet at all.
It can de novo.
We can de novo make it. We can make as much cholesterol as we need. So when we suppress cholesterol via diet or via pharmaceuticals, what we're doing is reducing the amount of cholesterol in circulation, in the plasma itself, not in cells. And we have plenty of studies to demonstrate that even at very, very low levels of cholesterol, we are not damaging things like our brains or our neurons. We're not damaging our cells. We're not damaging our steroid hormone synthesis. People are still getting pregnant, entirely fertile. Like there is no issue with this whatsoever. And actually, when you look at the Mendelian randomization studies that essentially study the natural variation in LDL-C in a population. So some people generally run high, some people run generally low. And when you look at the people who naturally run low levels of LDL-C without any pharmaceutical intervention, they have a massive reduction in cardiovascular disease. They have a huge reduction in things like dementia. So it speaks to LDL-C being causative in terms of these different diseases that we're talking about today. It's not just an associative character. So we have to get really, really serious about this.
Thank you, David Protein, for sponsoring today's episode. Team, between hospital rounds, intense podcast sessions, and training, I'm always on the move. And I struggle with finding quick snacks that don't sabotage my nutritional routines. This is why I found David Protein Bars. Now, cake batter is my favorite flavor, and let me tell you, it feels like indulging without any guilt. Each bar is packed with 28 grams of high-quality protein, just 150 calories, and 0 grams of sugar. Scientifically speaking, that's 75% of its calories purely from protein, which is about 50% higher than any other bar I've tried. So it's ideal for lean muscle growth, effective appetite control, and faster recovery after workouts. David Protein is generously offering my Neuro Experience listeners to an exclusive deal. Buy 4 cartons and get your 5th completely free at davidprotein.com/neuro, because humans might not be perfect, but David definitely is. A huge thank you to Ketone IQ for sponsoring this episode. There are days when I need to go deep. No distraction, no jitters, just clean mental clarity. So I've started taking, again, Ketone IQ. It's not a stimulant. There's no caffeine, no sugar, just clean ketones that cross the blood-brain barrier and fuel your neurons directly. You've been listening to the podcast, so you've heard me speak about the brain's primary fuel source, which is glucose, but it also uses ketones. And let me tell you, it uses ketones much more efficiently. So when I'm writing or analyzing data or prepping for a talk, I take a shot of Ketone IQ, and honestly, it's like flipping a switch. I feel focused, clear, and in control without the crash that usually follows coffee. And guys, the science is solid. This stuff supports mitochondrial ATP production, reduces oxidative stress, and even activates protective genes like SIRT3 and PGC1 alpha. It was originally developed for elite soldiers through a $6 million DoD contract, but it's now used by athletes, entrepreneurs, and people like me. And unlike most ketone products, this one actually tastes good. Right now, I'm taking the raspberry lemonade. They've also got an amazing apple flavor. If you want to try this, visit ketone.com/neuro for 30% off your subscription order plus a free gift with your second shipment. That's ketone.com/neuro. So you're saying then if you are prescribed a statin, let's just say Crestor, it doesn't mean you are minimizing your risk of elevated LDL. Because if you just said it's in the plasma and it's lowering it pharmacologically in the plasma, what's happening inside the cell itself?
Yeah, you're not damaging the internal generation of cholesterol in the cell. You're not doing that. You're not reducing your steroid hormone synthesis. That's not what happens whatsoever. What you're doing is you're reducing circulating cholesterol that has the potential to lodge itself into a damaged arterial wall where it can become oxidized, and then it can start the cascade of atherosclerosis. That's what drugs and other lifestyle measures should be focusing on and are focusing on, not the endogenous production of cholesterol.
And there's different forms pharmacologically. You've got, like I mentioned, the Crestor, then you've got PCSK9 inhibitors. So these are different things that you can go into with your doctor. But I just wanted to add with my mother, so what I'm doing now is we're going to go through, and I've ordered her a carotid ultrasound. I think that's really important. We know that the carotid arteries, the main blood supply to the brain, we're going to look at that. We're going to do a full CT angio, and we're just going to look at and then we're going to do a CAC scan as well. And I think that that's going to give me more of an understanding, because we know that cholesterols and lipid panels tell a story. It's not just about, it could be hypercholesterolemia. Her father had heart disease and type 2 diabetes. So and I've got a low LP(a), so does my dad. Within range, I should say. So it's definitely coming from my mother's side. So that's what we're going to do for her. Now,
just to double click on that point, I think most people think about LDL-C management through the lens of just cardiovascular disease, but actually when we say cardiovascular disease, we're referring to so many different endpoints. So when you think about, when I think about atherosclerosis, I think, yes, heart disease and doing CT angios and all the rest of it, it's great. I'm also thinking about the brain, so carotid artery ultrasounds. And when you have issues with the lack of blood supply to these areas, that's what can predispose us to strokes, but also vascular dementia. There are certain pictures of vascular dementia because of where you get furring of your arteries in the circle of Willis and the cerebral arteries. It's really important for people to understand that as well. And also, like I mentioned earlier, the abdominal aorta as well, like doing an ultrasound scan of that to see whether that is thickened or there's any furring there, I think is reasonable. And the peripheral arterial disease as well that we see commonly in smokers who have very damaged arteries because of years of exposing themselves to these pollutants that damage the arterial wall. So,
and do you see how this is all a cycle? Because after menopause, women's risk of having a heart-related event triples. So this is why this is just so important for so many women listening, because it's a silent killer. It's asymptomatic. You often, like pancreatic cancer, really, you often don't have any symptoms and signs until your first event, which could be a mild to a really rigorous heart attack. So we're going to move into now, I really want to go into your area of expertise, which is nutrition. Before we go into how nutrition can help us lower our risk, I want to understand what drives up LDL. Is it the croissants? Is it the saturated fats?
So definitely certain types of saturated fats will increase your LDL-C. We'll talk about cholesterol and food in a second, but as we're starting with saturated fats, there are certain types of saturated fatty acids that will raise our LDL-C and ergo raise our risk of heart disease. Quick primer, depending on the carbon chain length of the fats that you're consuming, it will have varying effects. And we call them different things, which is why in coconut we have things like caprylic acid. In chocolate, the large saturated fat is stearic acid. There are different types of fats in dairy, although that's another story, because the way those fats are contained within a globule membrane actually make it cardioprotective and or at least cardio-neutral. So there are lots of different types of chain lengths and stuff. If we're looking at typically high saturated fat foods, things like butter or beef tallow, you do get a blend. So some of it is mono and polyunsaturated fats, which we actually like, but a large proportion of it are certain types of fats that will raise LDL-C. So if people are consuming this, like have a small amount of it, no problem whatsoever, but don't dump it in your coffee. Don't deep fry with it. Don't consume large amounts of it in the sort of idea that, more is better for you and it's nourishing your cells. You might be able to use those fats for energy, but typically what we do is overconsume and we push up our LDL-C, which is shown by a lot of keto blood results that we have. So that's one thing. The other thing to realize, and this is something that's relatively new for me, is that whilst red meat has been demonized for being high in saturated fats, depending on what cut of meat you have, can either make it lean or a fatty cut. It's not the biggest source of saturated fats in our diet. So I have come around to the idea that having a small amount of red meat in your diet is perfectly fine. Having lean fish or lean poultry in your diet is perfectly fine. Having fatty fish is actually desirable because of the mono and polyunsaturated fats that you find in fish, and the EPA and DHA that are actually very cardioprotective as well. So the largest source of saturated fats in the diet, if you look at the population data and the dietary studies, is actually coming from what we call mixed goods. So pizza, cookies, basically ultra-processed packaged food, they tend to have lots of saturated fat, and that is the biggest contributor to our diet. So I'm not exaggerating, the natural forms of fats, but the largest thing that we need to consider is going to be these mixed products that are pushing up our LDL-C and ApoB.
What do you define as ultra-processed foods?
It's a good question. So there's different classifications. If you want to look at the formal definition of ultra-processed food, we have the NOVA classification that has pros and cons, but on the one spectrum, you've got a broccoli that is minimally processed by steaming, for example, with no additives to it. On the other side, you have I'm making up a broccoli protein bar that's got broccoli in, but it's been stripped of all of its nutrients. It's been alkalized, it's been bleached, and then you've got a whole bunch of additives in there and salts and sugars, and then you have emulsifiers to make the texture better. This is what we would class as an ultra processed food. So whilst it's still got some broccoli in, it is far removed from the original product, and it has the addition of all these other synthetics to make it palatable, to improve the shelf life, etc. Now, I'm not saying that we need to remove every single ultra processed food in our shopping basket. I think most of us can deal with cutting out a huge amount, but in certain cases, for athletes, for example, you actually require ultra processed foods to get enough sugar into your diet so you can actually perform to your best. I mean, this, like working with athletes all the time, these gels and stuff, they actually form a purpose, but for the average person, probably not. So I'd say that's what I would define as an ultra-processed product, and we consume far, far too much of them.
Yeah. Is there any way of understanding how many grams per day that we should be having, and is that the same for everybody?
If you look at the guidelines, they would say no more than 10% of your total calories should be coming from saturated fats, which I feel is a bit wishy-washy, and I think there are more specific ways in which you can titrate that according to your weight, and then you can come up with a grammage. But I think there's so much variability individually as to whether people who are consuming saturated fats, like what is their response? So, there are three things that we should be addressing is, okay, how much are you consuming? Who is consuming it? And what is their response to certain sat fats? Some people who are having coconut in their diet are having high amounts of LDL-C as a result of that. Other people can consume quite a bit and it doesn't seem to move the needle whatsoever. So I think this is why it's important to know your number and actually have a general steer of what fats you're consuming in your diet.
But we can burn those as fuel.
We can. So it depends on your exercise. But in terms of the caloric burn that you would you actually have as a total number of the calories burned in a single day, exercise doesn't really have a massive impact. You can certainly burn it off, but it also depends on how metabolically flexible you are as well, i.e. how readily can you go from burning carbohydrates to burning fats, and that can be a factor of fasting, what type of exercise you're doing, what does the rest of your diet look like. But yeah, I don't doubt that you can certainly burn it, but it also depends on the individual.
It's interesting, and that comes into consideration VO2 max and fat utilization. But we won't go into that in this episode. I really want to talk about fiber.
Yeah.
Because I know from my understanding, fiber is a great way to, I guess, lower cholesterol and help push it down. But I don't know too much about fiber as an intervention of lowering LDL.
Just to underline the fat conversation, that the other side to sat fats is mono and polyunsaturated fatty acids. So when you consume things like nuts and seeds that are typically high in these mono and polys, not only are you crowding out the saturated fats, and not only can you use those mono and polyunsaturated fats as fuel, but they also upregulate certain receptors that draw cholesterol into the cell where it can be utilized, and into the liver where it can be packaged. So you're almost having like a double whammy effect. You're not only providing your body with all these really healthy fats, but you're also reducing your cholesterol as well. So that's why, like, I would say if people want to use fat, maybe even, you know, in a high fat diet or a keto diet, that might be okay as long as you're having the majority of your fats coming from mono and polyunsaturated fatty acids. So just moving the picture and moving the needle towards that could actually be favorable as well.
And that takes omega-3 fatty acids into consideration.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So you can get that from like fish as well, like certain sources of plants like walnut and chia, although they're not long chain omega-3, they're short chain, but we can still utilize some of those fats as well. So I would say if anyone is interested in fats and want to maintain their fat intake, fine, but try and get it from mono and polyunsaturated whole food sources rather than refined food sources as well.
And people can do that by checking the back of the label and just understanding.
Yeah. I would just get it from nuts and seeds. We have so many different types. They're high in fiber that we're about to talk about, but they're also good sources of protein as well. So fiber is like this magical nutrient. There's a trend right now on TikTok called fiber maxing. I don't know if you've seen it, but
really,
I think people are taking it to the extreme where they're just like consuming way too much fiber really, really quickly. And I don't recommend that because you experience bloating. You need to train your microbes to be able to tolerate good amounts of fiber as well. And a lot of people are going from a low fiber diet to a high fiber diet. So you want to make sure that transition is nice smooth, because you'll feel it and everyone else around you will notice it as well. So very, very important to go slow when it comes to fiber. But fiber is this incredible ingredient for a number of different reasons, one of which is from the reduction in cholesterol. So the first thing it does, it's not the first thing, but when you consume it, you're essentially creating absorption for bile acids that contain cholesterol and excretion around the other end. So you're naturally removing cholesterol out of circulation.
So when you eat fiber, the molecules are actually binding.
The soluble fiber is actually binding some of these bile acids for excretion.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So you're actually getting this great effect of removing cholesterol out of circulation where it doesn't really need to be. The other thing is when you consume fiber, you're not consuming fiber for yourself. You're actually consuming in a large part for your gut microbes. So your microbiota is the collection of all the different microbes that you have in your body, on your skin, in our mouths, but it's largely concentrated in the large intestine. And we have bacteria, yes, but we also have things like nematodes, fungi, viruses. The virome, which is the genetic combination of all the viruses that we have in our body, is in some way bigger than the bacteriome as well. So there's so much that we don't even know or understand yet, and there's so many ways in which we could potentially modulate our microbiome, but this is all still relatively early science. And what happens is when you consume fiber, these microbes will eat up this fiber and they will create metabolites. And some of the metabolites that we're really interested in are called short-chain fatty acids, butyrate, acetate, and propionate. And these have multiple different roles. They will nourish your colonic cells. They'll provide energy. They'll create this mucin layer inside your gut, which protects your gut layer. So you're less likely to have intestinal hyperpermeability. You're less likely to have inflammation, which we know is cardioprotective as well. And it can also reduce the synthesis of cholesterol as well. So we're super, super interesting, all these different mechanisms by which just having more fiber in your diet can reduce your cholesterol. The other thing is, in a similar way to monounsaturated fatty acids and polyunsaturated fatty acids, it actually increases the LDL receptor activity on the liver. So on the liver, you have these receptors that are like constantly pulling out cholesterol from circulation, putting it back into the liver, repackaging it and sending it right out. And what you're doing is, if you increase the efficiency and the number of these receptors in your liver, you're just pulling more of this cholesterol out of the plasma circulation, which is reflected in your blood results as well. So if you start consuming fiber and you do it for 60 days, you're having a good amount. You're getting it from nuts and seeds. You're getting it from, let's say, psyllium husk. We can talk about some of the ingredients that I'm a really big fan of in a bit. And then in 60 days' time, you'll see that your apolipoprotein B marker comes down. It's great.
So you can lower your ApoB and LDL by eating plant-rich foods the same way that you can by taking a statin.
Absolutely. In fact, we know this from some really elegant studies that were done a number of years ago by a researcher called Jenkins. I'm blanking on his first name, but they created what's called the portfolio diet. So they looked at all these different types of fibers that you can get from whole ingredients, and there were four main categories. Category number one were what we call soluble fiber sources, so things like oats, barley. You get it in citrus and other polyphenol-rich foods as well. These different soluble fibers, and fiber is not just one thing. There are multiple different subtypes, but generally you get a good mix from that. Plant sterols, so you can get this from fortified spreads or supplements, but you can also get it quite naturally, which is where I prefer to get it from things like nuts and seeds, and you can get it from soy-based products. They actually did give extra soy protein, which you can get from tofu or tempeh or my favorite, edamame, but you can also get it from soy milk as well. And soy protein appears to have a unique effect on cholesterol lowering as well. And nuts and seeds, particularly almonds. Not only are you getting the added benefit of cardiovascular protection that we know from things like the PREDIMED study, where they gave them extra virgin olive oil and they gave them a handful of nuts. The nuts, particularly almonds, have got extra soluble fiber in as well, and there appears to be improved clearance of LDL cholesterol particles with getting more monounsaturated fatty acids in the diet as well.
Well, that was my next question, which is what types of fiber-rich foods should everyone start eating right away to see immediate improvements in cholesterol and heart health?
I would definitely do those four categories. So getting lots of different soluble fiber sources. You can get it from flax, chia. You can supplement with oat bran or just get it from whole oats. On the subject of oats, I know oats gets a lot of attention.
If you say the word glyphosate,
I know. I would say you want to try and look for glyphosate-free products. I'm becoming a lot more aware of the impact of glyphosate just in health in general. It's quite scary. But when you're looking at oats comes in a spectrum. You can get quite refined oat-based products that have a lot of the bran taken out of them, which is where you're getting all the benefits, because that's where you get a lot of the fiber itself. And then on the other end, you've got steel cut or pinhead oats that are like really hardy, and you have to cook them for like 35 minutes or so. You can cook them and keep them in your fridge and a Tupperware, whatever. But that's the good stuff. That's where you want to get your those are like the hardy oats. And the thing about whenever you're eating any ingredient, you don't want to just eat it on its own. You want to get a really good mix. So my overnight oats, for example, I use jumbo oats, but within that I've got a tablespoon of flax, a tablespoon of chia. I might add a protein powder to this as well. I'd add some form of natural sweetener, whether that's like some chopped up dried figs or dried dates or whatever. I'll add some fruit to that as well, and some frozen berries. You know, that's how we should be consuming oats or any ingredient rather than just on its own, because on its own it doesn't have that much protein, it doesn't have that much in the way of sort of variety of different fiber subtypes. So you want to be getting variety rather than just like oats on its own. And I think this is where oats gets a bit of a bad like label, because it is quite starchy on its own, but the pinhead stuff, that's actually like really robust from a food matrix point of view.
Team, on this show, we talk a lot about performance, how your brain works, how your body moves, and how you optimize both. And the one thing I've noticed is whenever I have a clinician in healthcare, you know, like a surgeon or a neurologist, chances are they're wearing figs. And it makes sense. So figs are scrubs and they're made for modern medicine. They're super comfortable, functional, and thoughtfully designed. I got my first pair of figs scrubs back in 2019. Oh my God, I thought I was just it. I was working in neurology. I loved them so much. The reason being is because they are designed with their proprietary fabric, which is called Pheon X, and it's engineered with purpose and backed by science. It's made with durable twill, and it features silver door. And this helps prevent odor and bacteria, and it keeps you cool with moisture-wicking, breathable fabric. And the best thing about it is it's entirely wrinkle-free. So you put it in the dryer, it comes out wrinkle-free. So when you're working 12-hour shifts, these details really matter. What I love most is that figs sets themselves apart with intelligent designs because on their pockets, they've got insertions for stethoscopes and trauma shears, adjustable drawer cords. It's amazing. And they're super comfortable. With back to school season upon us, it's the perfect time to stock up with some fresh outfits for the year, and Figs just dropped their new collection of limited edition styles and accessories. So if you're in healthcare or you're shopping for someone who is, you can get 15% off your first Figs order at wearfigs.com. Use code FIGSRX to get that 15% off. That's wearfigs.com, code FIGSRX. Thank you, Caraway, for sponsoring today's episode. You all know how serious I am about reducing toxins for brain health, and that commitment extends right into my kitchen. Caraway's non-toxic cookware has truly revolutionized my cooking experience. My absolute favorite is the Dutch oven. Beautiful, highly functional, and completely free from harmful PFAs and microplastics. Guys, did you know that 97% of Americans have PFAs circulating in their bloodstream, largely due to cookware? Actually, this was quite alarming when I found out that microplastics are now lodging into our brain tissues. Caraway's ceramic coating prevents toxins from seeping into your food and preserves essential nutrients. Plus, cleanup is incredibly easy. If you want to start your journey towards a toxin-free kitchen, you can by visiting carawayhome.com/neuro, and you will get 10% off. Cook clean, live clean. I think my whole issue here living in the US is how do I know that my fruits and vegetables are clean and they're not derived of these? I know, because so I had Dr. Ray Dorsey on the podcast, who's very well known for his research in Parkinson's disease. And he was the one who taught me that you should be cleaning your fruit because the products on top of the fruit or the pesticides or whatever it is actually one of the things causing Parkinson's disease.
Yeah.
That scared me. So now, actually, because I believe because of Ray and all of this information, Trader Joe's now sells this spray, this fruit and veg spray that you can spray on top of it, because water itself is not cleaning it.
The equivalent of EWG on the podcast in the UK, they're called PAN, or Pesticide Action Network. And I was asking him loads of questions about the fruit sprays and stuff. So you can make it yourself with a bit of vinegar and bicarb of soda.
I heard that you shouldn't be mixing the two. You should only have
just
bicarb. But
okay. Yeah. One of the two. If you want to just do one, spray it and you can spray and take the stuff off the surface. But it's in the plant. It's in the flesh as well. And so he was telling me, so he was telling me, like, look, you can scrub the outside as much as you can, but because these pesticides have been used throughout the life cycle of this plant, it's incorporated in the actual plant as well. So wherever possible, I would say, yes, go organic, absolutely. Do I, in the grander scheme of things, do I just want people to be consuming more fruits and vegetables versus ultra processed? Absolutely. But we're left with trade-offs here. We're always left with trade-offs, and this is the best, I think, in a way, of a trade-off for most folks. If you can afford to go organic, brilliant. But even organic, unfortunately, because of where they are situated close to other farms that might be using conventional growing methods, these are all contaminated as well. Not to the same degree, but we are going to be finding pesticides and other chemicals in our food, unfortunately, until the entire landscape goes organic, which I don't think is a possibility in the short term anyway.
So we just got to move to Italy.
Yeah, you're going to move to Italy. But then they've got their issues as well. In Europe, there's lots of issues with glyphosate. In the UK, we're noticing a lot more attention around this, but like it's still a bit of an issue. Just to close the loop, on the portfolio diet, I just want to mention that the results are pretty stark for this as well. So they demonstrated that you could lower LDL-C by as much as 30%, which is equivalent to a statin like lovastatin, a 20 milligram dose. So this is really, really impactful. And this is one of the reasons why, in general practice, I'm always a food first guy. I always want to take a food first approach, because even within that really impressive result that's going head to head with a pharmaceutical product, it doesn't encapsulate all the extra benefits that you're going to have for your brain, for your digestive system, for reducing inflammation levels. That it's not going to be captured in just an LDL-C lowering effect. There's going to be a magnitude of other impacts. And this is what I want people to understand about the power of food and why I'm such a staunch supporter of food as medicine. Not to say we can't use pharmaceuticals in addition, but these are really impressive, and in some cases just as impressive as drugs.
What is your stance on eggs?
Eggs are really interesting. Again, it comes down to how much you're consuming, who's consuming it, and your individual variability and what the rest of your diet looks like, right?
This is another question I had when we were talking about foods and saturated fats. The cholesterol consumed within an egg yolk cannot get into the blood. Is that correct?
So for certain people it does, and for most of us it doesn't. Or for most of us it has a negligible effect. So around 1 in 5 people are hyper absorbers of cholesterol from diet. So whether that's coming from beef or eggs or, pick your high cholesterol ingredient, you can potentially be part of this group that is essentially drawing a lot of cholesterol in and not having this negative feedback mechanism where you're actually expelling more cholesterol into your digestive system. So essentially it's like a gating system where you're allowing the cholesterol go in, but this gate's not opening, so you're just keeping the cholesterol in circulation. This is a hyperabsorber scenario. So certain people, they can have like an egg or two in their diet couple of days a week, and they can that can actually be reflected.
That's a small amount of.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that can actually be reflected in their blood results. So my pragmatic approach to this is, without having to do a fancy blood test, is okay, if you do have high cholesterol in your diet and you do a number of different things, try removing high cholesterol ingredients from your diet within reason and see if that actually does have an impact on your blood levels. If it doesn't, then you're fine to eat eggs. And I think eggs are a really nutritious product. They contain carotenoids and zeaxanthin, they contain choline, they contain good amounts of protein, really healthy fats, vitamin D, loads of really good products. And I would hate to take that out of someone's diet, ethical and environmental concerns aside. But because of the cholesterol, and for certain people that being an issue, it might be something to play around with. On the flip side, and I'm lucky to be in this camp, most people can tolerate cholesterol in their diet from things like eggs, because we just naturally excrete more whenever the cholesterol that we consume goes in. It's a very different mechanism for saturated fats. So the saturated fat and cholesterol are not equivocal in their impacting cholesterol in the blood.
I'm so happy that you cleared that up, because I love my eggs.
Yeah.
And I do want to go a bit deeper on tempeh and soy-based products, because I don't eat them, but I think I'm going to start.
Yeah. It's interesting, right? Because I love tofu and tempeh. I think, particularly tempeh, because it's a fermented product that increases the protein availability from the legume. And tempeh is not always soy as well. Tempeh is actually a fermentation process. That's what tempeh means in the Indonesian language. So you can tempeh anything, but it's commonly used with soybeans. Not only do you get the benefit of the protein, the benefit of the microbial product. So it's not a live probiotic, but because it's had probiotic elements, it's got this parabiotic effect where you're consuming some of the dead materials of the microbes that can be favorable for your gut. The isoflavones within the soy product may be having an impact as well on cardiovascular risk. But interesting, I spoke to Dr. Kevin Mackey about this on my podcast, and he did these studies where they stripped isoflavones from the soy protein that they were using. They stripped the fiber, so you're essentially basically using a soy protein product, and the cholesterol still went down. So they couldn't tease out exactly what the mechanism is with soy and how this has a cholesterol lowering effect, but it seems to work. And it might not be the isoflavones, it might not be the fiber, even though that would be my explanation. But from his studies, it's kind of like, it's a bit confusing and complicated. That being said, I think soy and soy-based products are a great addition to your diet. I would just be aware of the ultra-processed soy products that you find in like protein bars and pre-prepped vegan products. These are not things that we should be having in our diet as a staple. It should be the whole unprocessed products as much as possible.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but there was a lot of misinformation around soy products increasing your risk of breast cancer.
Unfortunately, it's one of these things where the naivety of people's understanding of phytoestrogens gets blown up. Phytoestrogens are naturally occurring compounds in lots of plant-based products, things like flax, the lignin-containing foods, soy. These do not have the same powerful estrogenic effects as something like xenoestrogens that you find in environmental pollutants or a purified hormone that you inject. This does not have the increased effect on breast cancer. In fact, it has the opposite effect. It has a protective effect on breast cancer that's been shown in many different studies looking at soy consumption. So I think that gets there's a lot of misinformation around that. The other thing is when you look at rodent studies and you give them whopping big doses of some of these phytoestrogens, something that would be impossible to consume in a whole foods diet and would be really, really undesirable from a supplementation point of view. I mean, we're talking 30 times the upper dose of the supplements that are available in the market, like these isoflavone supplements. And then you might have a detrimental impact on fertility, on testosterone levels in some of these rodent studies. And you see these being quoted quite a bit, I would say, online. But when you dig into the study, you realize that this is not equivalent. A, it's a rodent, and B, they're using doses that if you use the same for a healthy ingredient that you find in broccoli, like glucosinolates or quercetin or resveratrol, you'd have a detrimental impact as well, just by virtue of the fact that they're using a crazy high dose. So I'd be really careful about how you interpret that kind of stuff online, because that's the game that they're playing. There's a shock factor and there's a demonization of food. And in reality, I could demonize any food that I wanted to, but just by cherry picking a few studies. Take your pick. It could be protein powder, it could be corn, it could be broccoli, it could be kale, it could be lentils, it could be chicken.
It could even be water completely.
It could be water. It could be water. Like if I give you a high enough dose or a low enough dose, I could say something negative about any ingredient, and I could make a whole brand about how you shouldn't be eating that. In reality, I'm basically telling you not to eat anything. Mm-hmm. And it's really, that's the state of play with social media right now, because we're just so engaged by the shock factor. If I put a YouTube title, it was like, never eat this food, or like, never eat soy, never eat olive oil.
And it gets 2 million views.
And it gets 2 million views. You're like, okay, I'm going to do that again. Never eat peas. Yeah. Never eat strawberries. Like, I eat strawberries. Why shouldn't I be eating strawberries?
Well, apparently out of all of the fruits and berries, strawberries contain the most amount of pesticides.
Yeah, exactly. So we could do a whole video on like, never eat strawberries. But then in the actual fact, like when you think about strawberries, it's got biotin, it's got these fresh polyphenols in, like it's a healthy ingredient as part of a mixed diet. Yeah. Like if you consume just conventional strawberries for like years, maybe I can get on board with how this is going to have a detrimental effect, but that's not a healthy dietary pattern in the first place. So it's just, we're very simple beings, I think, humans in general.
But we complicate it.
This is why the algorithms play us like a fiddle.
Yeah.
Because we're just like, that looks interesting, let me click. And then other people get on board and be like, oh yeah, if I just put a title that says this, I can get people to click on it. And that's all we care about. Whereas I care about, and you do, just getting the information out there so people can navigate the misinformation that unfortunately is perpetuated by these algorithms. So you can be like, okay, no, that's BS. I'm going to have my peas. I'm going to have my fiber. I'm going to have my protein. I'm going to have some red meat. I'm also going to have some tempeh. You should be able to eat everything and a whole variety of foods as long as you're not allergic to it and as long as you're enjoying it as well. This is where I want people to get to.
And that's why you predominantly practice food as medicine. Yeah. Thank you, Mudwater, for sponsoring today's episode. If you're like me and coffee jitters disrupt your focus, then Mudwater is the solution you've been searching for. This unique blend includes cacao, chai, turmeric, and adaptogenic mushrooms like lion's mane and cordyceps, providing sustained, smooth energy without the crash. Scientifically formulated to boost cognitive function and immune function, Mudwater has truly enhanced my productivity and my clarity. Actually, guys, fun fact, I used to have my second coffee of the day at 2 p.m. Now I've switched it for Mudwater. Their matcha blend is equally impressive, deliciously smooth, earthy, and pure. Completely organic, sugar-free, and vegan, it's the perfect clean energy alternative. So if you are ready to ditch the afternoon coffee crashes, then go to mudwater.com, use code NEURO for 43% off your order, plus shipping and a complimentary frother. That is mudwtr.com. We're going to close that now, and I want to talk about my wheelhouse, which is exercise.
Okay.
And if exercise can have a direct impact on lowering cholesterol markers.
It's a good question. I would say the pragmatic perspective is when you lower your calories, i.e. you put yourself into a calorie deficit, it lowers cholesterol. So through that mechanism alone, you would be reducing your cholesterol. Can it have an impact on LDL-C? I'm not hot on that unless you can tell me otherwise, but
I don't think so.
I wouldn't say that would have an impact on lowering circulating levels of cholesterol as measured by ApoB. Maybe it has a marginal effect on HDL-C, that you'd want to be higher, but I'm not too sure on that. But I'm not to say that exercise isn't a healthy thing. And going back to sort of the triggers and the sort of like the main pillars of why people get atherosclerotic disease in the first place, you're reducing blood pressure overall, not during the exercise, but as a consequence of regularly exercising. You're reducing your resting heart rate. You are reducing the likelihood of damage to your arterial walls. This is going to have a favorable impact on your cardiometabolic risk overall, whilst it might not be reducing cholesterol markers in and of itself.
My understanding is that you get better arterial health from exercise due to the shear force and shunting of the blood. And you obviously improve left ventricular hypertrophy, which is all having effect on blood flow and endothelial health.
Yeah, it's important to note here, because you can have the most pristine diet and you can have quote unquote normal cholesterol levels, but you can still succumb to cardiovascular disease because it's just one element and it's necessary but not sufficient to cause it on its own. And it's, even normal levels, not sufficient protection. You need to think about the other elements of the driving forces behind it. So exercise is a big component, and I think it's something that doesn't get talked about enough. Stress and sleep. And actually there were some interesting studies that I need to do a deep dive into, that came out of University of Maryland, where they showed different cohorts of people different entertaining movies. One was like a dramatic and emotionally triggering, like World War II style movies where there was lots of stuff going on. It was stress inducing. And the other one was a lot more relaxing. And when they looked at measures of arterial health in the stressed movie watchers, they found that their arteries were reacting in a way that showed that they were stressed, they were stiffened. It affected the flow in their arteries. And so, it's very hard to make an extrapolation, but it stands to reason that if this is your day-to-day, right, you're in your car, you're screaming at the traffic, you're having an argument with your family, you're stressed out at work, you're constantly looking at emails. I might not have a blood marker to give you a picture of just how bad that is for your health, but I would strongly believe that this is having a negative impact on your cardiovascular risk health. Even if you've got normal cholesterol, even if you exercise regularly, like, this is something to address. And until we have a biomarker for that, it's going to be hard for me to prove that. But my intuition, having seen thousands of patients during my medical career, is that is having a big impact on our health overall.
So Scary Move is increasing your cholesterol. I
don't think
that.
It's increasing your cholesterol, but it's definitely increasing your risk.
I'd love to ask something memorable about one of your past patients, if you have any. If anyone really made a turning point in your career. I remember the turning point that I witnessed, which was and I speak about her often, a 52-year-old mother of 3 who came to the practice, and she was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's disease. And when we, without, irrespective of the ApoE4 gene, and which is very highly unlikely, and it was very scary to me. And when I asked her a bit about her history and her background, she just followed what the system told her. And that was a big turning point for me. That's when I really, and this was many years ago, this is when I really realized, okay, lifestyle factors and interventions have to be spoken about. So is there anybody in your career that has made the turning point for you?
It's really interesting. I've got lots of examples of people that have changed their diet and improved things like inflammation and reduced their cholesterol and yada 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 across multiple different domains. I think one of my first turning points was a lady with PCOS, and she improved her diet, and then her symptoms improved. We were able to reduce some of the meds that she was on. But actually, something recently that happened with a family member was they went to a routine physical as part of life insurance, and there was a small blip on their ECG. And sometimes this can happen. You can have a little bit of depression in one of the ST segments and one of the leads. And you don't really look too much into it, but they made a bit of a song and dance about it. And I naively thought, it's probably because they just want to be cautious, as this is an insurance medical. And that led to a number of different investigations, a stress-induced ECG, and it was still there. I was like, okay, fine, we'll do some other stuff. And cholesterol was mildly raised. We go all the way to a CT angio, and he ends up having a stent because the LAD, which is the left anterior descending, which is one of the main vessels that supplies the left ventricular part of the heart, which is the largest part which pumps blood around the body, had a stenosis of 80%. And that is colloquially known as the widowmaker.
Yeah.
And this individual was symptomless, perfectly fit and healthy, no prior medical history, not overweight, not a smoker, blood pressure was maintained, mildly raised LDL-C. And when I say mild, I mean it was mild. It was around the reference range. It wasn't that much. But there's never been sort of any indication that they would be at risk of heart disease. No chest pain, nothing like that. And, even though, and I feel like kind of embarrassed talking about this, even though I've known this for a long time, when you see someone close to you go through this, and then having, a near miss essentially, and luckily they're stented and their LAD is looking much better. You realize it brings home to reality the stats, because we pore over the stats, we look at the numbers, we can speculate about cardiovascular risk over a 10-year period, but when you see that and you're like, oh, okay, it brings it right back home that we could have missed that. And I remember being at medical school, and the commonest presentation for cardiovascular disease is sudden death and a cardiac arrest. And we don't see those in A&E. The commonest, from a medical student perspective, the commonest reason might be, the commonest symptom might be like chest pain or shortness of breath. No, it's sudden cardiac arrest. So this is a real serious problem. And even though we have the markers, we have to get really realistic about it. We have to get quite aggressive about it as well.
Wow, that is quite scary. I can see how it makes a turning point in your life. If you could change just one thing today in somebody's diet who is listening to significantly reduce their risk of having a heart attack or a stroke, what would that be?
I would be increasing fiber. I'd be getting fiber at every mealtime. I have this little thing called BBGs. I don't know if you heard me talk about it, but it's beans, berries, greens, seeds, and nuts every single day. Just tick that off every single day.
You eat beans every day?
Yeah, I have beans every day. So it's like azuki beans, black beans, could be chickpeas, could be lentils, green, pure lentils, whatever you like. Just a handful. You don't need to have it all in one sitting. It could be just like, on your toast or whatever, wherever you like it. Just getting a cup of that every single day cooked. Berries. Fantastic ingredient, soluble fiber as well. They have all the anti-inflammatory properties. They're very good for your brain. You can get them fresh or frozen if they're out of season. Again, I have that as a snack or just as a side of a meal. If I'm having a diversity bowl, which is just like a salad with some other random ingredients. Greens every single meal is what I go for, but at least getting 1 cup cooked of Swiss chard, kale, spinach, whatever greens you like. And then seeds and nuts, a handful of each. Could be anything. Hemp seeds are one of my favorites. Sunflower seeds. You can use flax, walnut, almonds, any nuts you like. And you get BBGs every single day. You're adding a ton of fiber. You're adding variety. Your microbes will thank you. It will be beneficial for your cholesterol levels, and it will keep your protein levels relatively high as well, because you're adding a little bits of protein there as well, and then seeds and nuts. So I'm a big fan of getting BBGs in every single day. And it's very simple, and we have it on our fridge at home.
I know that you've got an amazing book here where you share all of your amazing recipes, healthy, high protein. So we're going to link this below. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Louisa.
This is actually, I've got one at home. It's sitting on the kitchen bench, and I'm going to make a recipe from this. I'm going to try and adhere to this at least twice a week.
I mean, I want people to be good guesstimators of protein in the diet. I know we haven't spoken about it much today, but protein is one of the fundamental parts of our diet that I feel needs readdressing, because whilst everything seems to have high protein slapped on the label, whether it's protein bars or cereals or candies, actually healthy high protein is getting a good mix of animal products if you eat them, plant-based protein, but also getting protein regularly every mealtime and getting enough every 24 hours. And I feel that the dietary guidelines for protein are way underdosing protein for the majority of us, particularly those postmenopausal who exercise regularly, who are over the age of 50. We all need to be consuming more protein because we become resistant to protein as we age. And this is why, sarcopenia is so rife as well. And it's a real big risk factor for brain health and cardiometabolic health.
So in part 2, maybe in London, we'll do an entire episode based on protein.
Would love it. Let's do it.
But until then, Rupy, thank you for being part of the Neuro Experience.
Appreciate it.